Bore da, Shemai, Alan Netherwood. You've got my biography. I'm a Carmarthenshire citizen. I'm a landowner. I'm also a small and medium-sized enterprise based over in Llandilo. I've been pickled in this stuff for about 20 years. And I'm going to be quite provocative this morning and stir you up a bit before you have lunch. Okay, when I joined local government in Cardiff, late 1990s, the reaction I used to get from directors and politicians was, we do sustainable development, we deliver sustainable development through our services. And over the last 20 years, I've realised, and I choose my words carefully, how complacent and arrogant that actually was. Why? Well, I'm thinking about this best place, Wales being the best place, and I've been fortunate enough to be a bit of an anorak for Peter over this national conversation, getting very familiar with Office National Statistics spreadsheets. So I'm going to fire a few statistics at you. 23% of people in Wales live in poverty. Okay? 32% of children in Wales live in poverty. Fuel poverty affects 42% of rural households. The life expectancy between the poorest wards and the more affluent wards in somewhere like Swansea is 10 years, the difference. Okay? Literacy, 25% of our population lack basic skills in literacy. 51% lack basic skills in numeracy. So this is where we are at in 2014. Oil, 80% of our commute is reliant on oil in Wales, a depleting resource. 25% of planning applications in Wales that were approved last year were in areas of flood risk. Okay, what are we doing? We're doing all sorts of good stuff around early intervention, all sorts of brilliant stuff around poverty, but that's where we're at. Where do we want to be in 2050? This is a busy slide, but I really want to get to this nub of future generations because we talk about them in passing. Why don't we account for future generations in what we do on a daily basis? Well, this guy, Professor Dennis Thompson at Harvard, he's the person who's kind of clarified it for me. He talks about this issue of presentism. Because citizens discount the future and future generations, the democratic process does and follows suit. And presentism, it neglects long-term risks, citizens not yet born. It maximises the interests of immediate descendants, quite natural. Temporal limits on politics and policy and finance. We work within very short financial cycles, 4 or 5 years. Jane was alluding to it before, 4 or 5 years at best. And we actively discount rather than account for the needs of future generations. We ignore them. John Rawls, a famous author around the theory of justice, talks about do unto future generations as you would have past generations do unto you. So we talk in passing about future generations. Professor Thompson talks about do policies and actions, do they leave them with greater utility or less utility? So that's one kind of lens we could look at. You know, what we're passing on to the next generation, does it enable them to use stuff to the same level or use stuff at a lesser level? And he talks about different models, and we talk about governance quite in passing. He talks about different models of governments and governance expressing either the perspectives of future citizens, acting as a surrogate, identifying values that we might neglect or priorities that we need to adopt on behalf of future citizens, and we need to protect their capacity for making collective sustainable decisions. Talk about challenge, Jane. That's the stuff we should be challenging around the Future Generations Bill, in my opinion. So quite theoretical, academic. Let's bring it down to a kind of personal level. I'm 48 in December, I'm losing count. 48 in December. And I kind of think about what hopefully is only half a lifetime of change. What's changed over the last 47, 48 years in terms of those sorts of issues? Lots. So geopolitics, Soviet Union's collapse, China and India, economic powerhouses. We've had EU expansion, globalization has taken over our economy. We've had massive technological change, brilliant advances in health. Our communities have changed fundamentally across Wales in many areas in terms of diversity, migration, marriage, people moving in and out of communities. Our resources, North Sea oil's pretty much come and gone. We're incredibly consumptive, wasteful, energy intensive, and our role as individuals, the role of women has changed phenomenally in that 47 years. Our access to information, we vote less, and we're more consumerist. So what will the future look like for these future generations? The students I teach in the university in Cardiff, they're going to retire in 2063. We talk about 2063 as if it's a long time ago. This is within their professional lives. Now here we've got a Carmarthenshire citizen. I'm using my child as a prop. This is Evie. She's 7. And the other day I thought, okay, let's map her life out and think about the time frame. And I'm making all sorts of assumptions here. Assumptions that she'll have a first kid about 27. She might have a 40-year professional career. 50, yeah, probably, yeah. She'll have a good pension fund that will pay. Right, so let's just kind of... She's born 2006, leaves school 2024, graduates 2027, first job a year later. She has her first kid 2033. Her career lasts until 2068. She puts me in a retirement home at 2046. Good riddance, Dad. Mortgage paid off, 2068. Her daughter, Ebony's her favourite name at the moment. Ebony puts her in a retirement home to 2090. And if we take Ebony, she's leaving school middle of the century. Her next generation, 2060. She's putting Evie in a retirement home in 2090. And so on. My challenge to you, to make this relevant to you, is go home with your family, do this exercise. It's incredibly emotive, because this is my grandchildren I'm talking about. Okay, so future generations. So the question I've got in my head is, we've got all of these sorts of trends that I bang on about on a weekly basis. Climate adaptation, resource scarcity, energy, food security, water security. We've got projected aging population. All the health indicators and trends are going in the wrong direction. And we've got this reality of austerity. Less public money to deal with all of this stuff. And the nub of employment. What are people going to be doing in Wales in 2050? Because we're an incredibly public service orientated country. So if we navigate our way through the next 50 years, that's Mr. Magoo for some of the younger ones in the room, if you don't recognise it. What might the bill actually mean for Carmarthenshire? So it's not motherhood and apple pie, it's hopeful. Okay? We would have adapted well to everything that climate change is throwing at us. What's predicted by 2050, and we'd still be planning for a changing future. Because this is the biggie. It's going to affect our economy, our communities, migration, the lot. I've been pickled in this. I'm absolutely convinced. Any skeptics in the room, please have lunch with me. Renewables technology would have limited fuel poverty, okay, and increased Carmarthenshire's sufficiency. And by sufficiency, I mean its ability to look after itself. We're incredibly blessed in Wales and in Carmarthenshire with opportunities to create our own energy and wean ourselves off a resource that is going to become more expensive and less secure. So, our energy supplies will be secured despite resource conflict abroad. And if there's anything that's bringing that home to me, it's the Crimea situation at the moment. Our electricity grid will be well adapted for microgeneration. And I think there's an issue around this, in that our energy kit in Wales needs a hell of a lot of investment, whether it's the gas-powered, I always get that wrong, gas-fired power stations, or the grid itself to have the capacity for renewables. So that's where we'd be. Social services would have been redesigned because the books aren't balancing. Doing some work in Swansea, adult services, social services, the current models are totally unsustainable financially. So what are we going to do? Do we enable communities to look after this increasingly ageing population through social and community enterprise? Make people less reliant on local authority public services and more reliant on themselves, and that requires a cultural shift. Our transport infrastructure is still usable even though we've had to let some roads go. Working in Torfaen, at the moment, they're going to have to let some roads go. The money doesn't add up. We have a massive bill for infrastructural maintenance. And we're going to have to look at some different sorts of models for maintaining the transport infrastructure that we rely on, whether it's in communities or through service delivery. So, rural communities receive grants to maintain vital B roads. Potential model. Here's some more positive stuff. All of that early intervention stuff we're doing with young kids has meant that those statistics on literacy and numeracy are a thing of the past. So Carmarthenshire has these high levels of skills, and they're translated into small-scale businesses across Carmarthenshire. And we all have really good broadband. Please. So I talked about the public sector being a massive employer across Wales. So it's still serving the community, it still provides many jobs, sometimes multiple jobs in families. Yeah. But the green economy in Carmarthenshire is booming because it's using its rich natural assets. Okay? So you've adopted, or we have, adopted sustainable approaches to agriculture, horticulture, the way we produce energy and tourism. And we're doing some of this stuff now. But this is a shift. It's not incrementalism, it's a shift. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. We've got enough water. Cymru tell us the challenge that we've got is more than the last 2 generations in terms of maintaining water supply for communities, for businesses to make our economy tick. So, in 2050, although climate change is badly affecting it, we're doing better at collecting water when it arrives in our landscape and using it. So farmers now store water and supply a water grid for business use and irrigation. Anybody from Cymru here? They'd probably shoot me. There's all sorts of issues around that. And communities have become more self-reliant, less reliant on public services, because quite frankly, many of those public services won't be there. Okay. Communities are innovating to solve their problems. We have this strong culture of citizenship, which really kind of helps that shift. And we're using our landscape in Carmarthenshire to capture floodwater, grow food and fuel, and maintain pollinators, the things that actually pollinate our crops, which feed us. Okay? Totally different approach. And we're starting to use our money a little bit differently. What's been interesting in the work in Swansea is the scale of their investment portfolio. As a council, it's just phenomenal. And I think we have to look at different financial models where council investment portfolios can be used in public and private partnerships to afford to build all of those affordable homes we desperately need in Wales, and to make our infrastructure last, and make it resilient to climate change. We need some different models because the traditional local authority model ain't going to work. Xavian's still here somewhere. You won't. And all of those high levels of obesity and associated diabetes that most health organisations are predicting haven't occurred because we've been really good at education, health and recreation programmes. Okay, so that's positive news. And our systems of government, public funding, taxation, investment, all work with the future in mind. They look after the needs of the next generation, and as Peter was talking about, they're held accountable. That's Llandilo Town Council, the Senedd, the Carmarthenshire Council. How far are we going to get by 2050? That's I kind of look at that as a pretty reasonable future for EV. How far are we going to get? Now, I imagine some students in this university in 2050 being given 2 examination questions. Did the Future Generations Bill shift our short-termist culture from 2015 onwards? Was there a kind of real sea change? And were our public bodies post-2015 held accountable for their plans for mid-century? I think they're 2 really good litmus tests for a student in 2050. Now, Peter was talking about these building blocks, and you know, slagging off local government. They are my bread and butter. Okay, so I shouldn't really do that. We've been doing some work with the Welsh Local Government Association saying, well, if you're kind of putting future generations and sustainable development as a central organising principle, this isn't a tick box where you go sustainability appraisal, tick that, job done. This is a shift in the whole culture of the organisation and requires a change management programme. And the meeting we've got on Monday, where we've got, I think it's 14 authorities, including Carmarthenshire, with some of their senior people, is to talk to them about these building blocks which I've developed for the WLGA. They're about strategy, so it's long term, about financial and legal systems not getting in the way of doing something different or innovative and actually taking some risks, around governance, so that's not just the cabinet or executive of these local authorities, but also their scrutiny functions and their relationship with communities, and communities being represented better in decision making. Business processes, all of that corporate plan, business plan, risk management, emergency planning, that sort of stuff. Approaches to physical development, not just the LDP, but stuff like the capital programme where you're investing your money in transport infrastructure. And capacity building in the council, which is a biggie. Now, going back to the guy from Harvard, shifting thinking in those organisations away from presentism towards the future being taken into account in every decision. And then the final kind of building block, and there's 100 other things attached to these building blocks, But the final building block is around being accountable. So that's internal audit, around finance, relationship with Wales Audit Office, scrutiny, the lot. So I think that's going to be available on the web post-Monday. It doesn't matter what sort of organisation you are or what size. Have a look at it, because something might resonate. This is the what. This is the doing for that kind of shift. We've been working on a model of incrementalism since the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. And quite frankly, we're not getting far enough, fast enough to deal with some of these trends. So is a Future Generations Bill more incrementalism, or does it provide us with an opportunity for a shift? I hope it's the latter. I think the effectiveness of the bill is going to be down to how bodies interpret it. And I think there is a culture in local government, as an example, where some authorities will take this as a strong opportunity for change, and others will comply as weakly as they can get away with. And we're going to see the whole spectrum across Wales, so the teeth this bill has got, I think, is critical. I hope it means, you know, my vision, my wish for the future is that it results in alternative models of delivery to cope with some of the stuff that's coming on the horizon. We innovate instead of being risk averse. We have a mid-century focus for future generations, and we have a positive way of accounting for instead of discounting future generations' needs. So what I hope that's done is kind of challenge us all, really, that we talk in passing about future generations. It's proximate to your kids and grandchildren, nephews and nieces, the lot. What sort of legacy are we going to leave them by mid-century? That's me done. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Challenging and provocative. Thank you very much, Alan. And as sitting there thinking, you know, it's 2014 now. 2050 is in 36 years. I remember being asked back in 2011 why we were fixing on 2050. Was it because it was so far away? And of course that means that you know, people cannot take decisions now that they would take closer to a deadline. It's not a deadline, but 2050 is also the date by which the climate change legislation should lead to an 80% reduction in terms of our current carbon delivery. So bringing together in One Wales, One Planet in 2009, the carbon reduction agenda, which is a statutory agenda in legislation that is accountable to the UK government, with a sustainable development, optimistic future, seemed to be a really good way to go in terms of developing the resilience of our communities in positive ways. But if we look back 36 years, I was 21, and I was driving a Ford Anglia, and I was only just allowed to vote. Because when I was 21, you had to be 21 in order to be able to vote. So I'm sure that everybody else in this room can go back 36 years and think of something that is fundamentally different to the way that we live our lives today. And there may be just one or two who cannot go back 36 years. But as Linda said earlier, not enough of them. And I will take you up on putting the question to the students of the University of Wales Trinity St David in due course. But long-term future. So questions for Alan in terms of the kind of approach he's been taking with how to get local authorities, because that's been your particular expertise, hasn't it? How to challenge government on what this looks like. How to challenge local authorities on what the services will look like for the future. And his throwaway remark, it's not a throwaway remark, but his throwaway remark about the fact that most of the public services that we see now as public services will not be there by 2050, because the financial base will not be there to provide them. So, questions, comments to Alan?
We're looking at the moment.
Right, no. Right, at the back, say who you are.
My name's Sarah Wright from College Carmarthenshire. I work with FE students, and one of the issues that I teach sustainable development, really, or promote sustainable development in the college. And one of the things that is really important to us is to be able to engage both staff and students by what this actually means for the future. And what I would like to ask is, I think that's a fantastic presentation, and I'd like to use that in staff development, and perhaps I can encourage staff to be engaging with their students in the realities of what this actually means for the future.
You're very welcome to use it, as long as I get mentioned, you're very welcome.
I think a lot of us are going to use it. Right, okay. Actually, just Sarah, just say a couple of things you've done recently, though, in College Carmarthenshire, because you've been doing some really interesting stuff around sustainable development, about fair trade.
Well, we've recently had a week's activities on fair trade with somebody from Zimbabwe, came to do workshops. Virtually every group in the college got involved. They listened to a long presentation about the realities of what fair trade means in the developing world. They did a sponsored walk, they had workshops, they ran a sale, a whole range of different things, and they got really excited about the whole thing.
But it's the local and global link, and that's very, very, very important. Because what you didn't do in your futures, what are the video walls going to look like? In our rooms, where we can talk to other parts of the world and have them in the room while we're having breakfast, which is starting now. But technology will be enormously opportune in terms of taking things forward. Over there, who was there?
Claire.
Oh, Claire.
I had a question. I think sometimes people look at these things and think it's such a big issue. What can I do as a person, like in my professional life or whatever? And I wondered if you've been working with WLGA. What's been your experience of working with counsellors, with professionals? Do people engage with the idea and they're all for it, and then just encounter blockages along the line, or where are?
Well, you can probably imagine, Claire, the kind of range of reaction you get to that sort of stuff, from the kind of very glib, I'm not bothered, I'm not going to be around, to oh my God, this is just too much. What do we do? And I think the lesson I've learned for 7 years now in working with the WLGA is make it proximate. And by proximate, I mean... But by proximate, I mean, if you're talking to the transport engineers up in Gwynedd, and you're talking about the fabric and the resilience of the transport infrastructure up there, you get into their language, you get into their vocabulary, you find out what makes them tick, their constraints, their finance, and then you go in and engage them. Or it's the same, we're doing work on the £48 million worth of cuts Swansea are having to make at the moment. Working with the director of finance there. You can imagine most top managers there are kind of saying, we'll be lucky to get through the next 3 years, never mind think about 2030 financial plan. It takes a good kind of 8-9 months of engagement, exploratory work around scenarios before you can sit down at a table with all of the finance people and say, okay, let's have a look at a 2030 financial plan. So it's a lot of groundwork, a lot of capacity building, much the same as you do in communities. Holding hands, reassuring, all of those kind of skills we all have. No golden bullet. It's you make it relevant to that audience.
Thank you. Can we? And we're eating into your lunchtime at the moment. Yeah. So let's have. But still, there are a few other hands up. So please.
Mike Burns, Llanelli Town Council. I was interested in the throwaway and about public services, they're being eroded massively at the moment. But is there no possibility that there would be a basis for a taxation system that would support public services in this future 36 years down the line? Could not taxation be achieved on the future industries that will grow and those that continue to be successful from the present time?
I agree with you. Theoretically, yes, absolutely. I don't know what Wales's powers are around that sort of issue. Yes.
Where the very rich pay no tax whatsoever. Now, if we change that, there would be enough money to feed the world and give education and so on.
Yeah.
So it could be done.
Did everybody catch the name of that?
UK Gold, and it has been shown in Carmarthen once, but I'm sure that it would be the people who made the film, Christian Aid and Oxfam, would be more than willing to show it again, and it's well worth seeing.
Okay, to come back, Mike, just quickly on your question. I think what's going to be really interesting to track as this bill is adopted is devolution of tax-raising powers in Wales. I've got no answer, but that's what we need to be tracking, and that's not what we need to be looking at in terms of accountability.
I also believe that we should have no limit on energy production, no 350, certainly no 50 megawatt limit, really no 350 megawatt limit. I believe that the Welsh Government then would be, if it obtains tax-raising powers, would be able to look at things like, for example, the hypothetical 7 barrage and the company there, and achieve revenue from the immense energy production that would incur.
Okay, that's a whole kettle of fish, isn't it? I'll just nod. Yeah.
I think we, certainly having just been on the Silk Commission, I think it's fair to say that there were a number of people on the Silk Commission who would have preferred to see no limit and have the energy powers fully developed to Wales. But it was a unanimous report, and the unanimity ended up at 350, which still could deliver substantial energy contribution, which could be developed in Wales in partnership with communities in a way that's not been able to be done hitherto. If the powers are devolved, of course, because they still sit with the UK government. Sorry, there's a question over there, please.
It was, yes, my name is Pat Loveracher, and I'm representing Canolfan Community Interest. It was a point about tax havens, which prompts the question, how can you have a strategy for changing power structures that are outside Wales? Because in a globalised world, Wales, as a fairly small country, has this excellent forward thinking about future generations, but the people holding the financial strings elsewhere won't necessarily agree. How can future generations, our aspirations, be turned into reality if the rest of the world is not fully in support?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there. One is, that comes up a lot in my work with local government, is this isn't within our gift to affect. And the way I often turn that round is, local authorities, whatever shape they're in, and voluntary sector, community sector, are going to be managing the consequences of these sorts of trends. So it doesn't mean that they can dismiss them because the power is elsewhere. We lobby, we have lobbying organisations, we have politics. So there's no easy answer to that. I just think, not being able to have the gift to affect something directly shouldn't be used as an excuse for inaction.
I agree with you absolutely. Right, one last comment over there, because we need to move on.
What suggestions do you have about agriculture? I'm Anson Allen, Amantoe Community Growers. Agriculture, the farmers are struggling as they always have done. Monoculture, pollution of water, everything. Diet, exporting all the stuff to China and everywhere else. What sort of approach would you have to adapting agriculture to meet your...
Thanks, Anson, for that easy question. I'm going to be very interested to see how the Environment Bill and the new single body Natural Resource Wales works with agriculture to focus on a more kind of ecosystems approach to managing and using our land. I think their influence by a CAP and Rural Development Plan is going to be very interesting to watch over the next 15-20 years. I'm looking at you, Hugh.
Yeah, well, I think if I could just comment, the Welsh Government has made an announcement looking at kind of the support mechanism for agriculture, and the current Land is taking a decision to rebalance the support mechanism of payments for farmers in preference to diverting some of that money back to support mechanisms towards more conservation, environmentally friendly approaches to agriculture. So it's a very brave decision that he has made, but I think it's something that would hopefully benefit the environment and the wider communities in going forward by 2019.
And that can be explored with Hewell later this afternoon.